ancient biblical prophets wrote about the future. Today, theologians are poring over those scriptures with a firm belief that their prophecies are coming to pass. Journey now into the world of eschatology on Prophecy in the News with author and lecturer J.R. Church.
On today's Prophecy in the News, we're going to discuss the sons of Ishmael. If there ever was an enemy of the Jews, they would be the enemy. Gary Stearman is here to discuss with me the history of these unusual people.
The Ishmaelites, where are they today? Who are they today? You know, J.R., there's a question. I've heard people say, you know, if Abraham hadn't made that terrible mistake and brought Ishmael into the world, why, there wouldn't be any problems in the Middle East today. He brought it on himself. And you know, there's a degree to which that's true, but it's actually a much bigger story than that. We're going to try to look at it today as we talk about the sons of Ishmael.
Yes, Abraham needed an heir. God had promised him an heir. But Sarah said, I'm too old. Take my handmaid Hagar. She will bear a son for me. Surrogate motherhood got the world into trouble. It still does, by the way. Listen to Genesis chapter 17, verses 4 through 6. As for me, behold, my covenant is with thee, God says, and thou shalt be a father of many nations. Abraham, the great goy, shall we say. He's the father of Gentiles. So the Lord promised him that he would be the father not of one people, but of many. Neither shall thy name any more be called Abram, but thy name shall be Abraham, for a father of many nations have I made thee. I will make thee exceeding fruitful, and I will make nations of thee. And the word nations here in Hebrew, I understand, is goyim.
That's right.
The Gentiles, that's a common term used by the Jews for Gentiles. And kings shall come out of thee. Can you imagine Ishmael and his offspring? And then there was Keturah and her offspring, all sons of Abraham. Quite a mix.
Well, you know, in Genesis 17, when God assured Abram that he would have an heir, and God even says you're going to name him Isaac. And Abram was very, very confused about all this. And one of the first reactions that he had as Abraham was that Ishmael would be taken care of. And in Genesis 17:18, Abraham said unto God, "Oh, that Ishmael might live before thee." He was afraid that Ishmael would be cut out of the covenant. And in the 20th verse, the Lord says to Abraham, "And as for Ishmael, I have heard thee. Behold, I have blessed him. Will make him fruitful, and will multiply him exceedingly. 12 princes shall he beget, and I will make him a great nation, but my covenant will I establish with Isaac." So now you've got two nations. You've got the nation out of Ishmael, and then another nation coming through Isaac.
Isaac had 2 sons, Ishmael had 12. That's amazing, isn't it?
It is.
Had a lot more than Isaac. Of course, then Jacob came along and he had 12 sons.
He had 12.
I guess to match the 12 of Ishmael. There must be something prophetic there.
Well, you know, J.R., if we attempt to trace these sons through history, at first, and authorities will say this time and again, they'll say these sons cannot be traced. They've just disappeared into the dust of history. But in fact, I believe they can be, to a very great extent, traced. In Genesis 25:12 through 18, it says, "Now these are the generations of Ishmael, Abraham's son, whom Hagar the Egyptian, Sarah's handmaid, bare unto Abraham. These are the names of the sons of Ishmael by their names, according to their generations. The firstborn of Ishmael, Nebajoth, or Nebajoth. Some people may say Nebajoth, but it's Nebajoth, Kedar, Abdiel, Mibsam, and Mishma, and Duma, and Massa, and Hadar, and Tema, and Jetur, and Naphish, and Kedema. These are the sons of Ishmael." Now, these 12 princes, J.R., have left etymological tracks in the desert, if you will, linguistic traces. We find their names in the place names of today's Arabia, as well as historic Arabia. We also find that they fathered certain sons who in turn fathered desert tribes who became the Bedouins. And that's perfectly traceable.
You know, when people say that somebody cannot be traced, that just gives you that desire to find out what can't be found out.
I think that's right.
The article that Gary has written is in our February edition of Prophecy in the News magazine, and a great article here. Gary, the Scripture also says that their boundaries are listed in the Scripture, and so this tells us when they are, where they're going to be, and then the Scriptures indicate that they'll be around in the last days, so they must still be around today.
They're still around today. It's very plain. There are a number of prophecies, and we're going to look at a couple of those that suggest that they will still be in existence today. And we find out in one verse in Genesis 25, they dwelt from Havilah unto Shur, that is before Egypt, as thou goest toward Assyria. And J.R., that land, that's just like a real estate abstract. Havilah unto Shur is the land between the border of Egypt into the central Arabian desert.
All the way to the Persian Gulf.
All the way to the Persian Gulf, really.
Yeah.
And then, as thou goest toward Assyria, marks off the northern border. In Hebrew, it says until Assyria, which is the northern border, which is, 800, 900 miles north of central Arabia. So you have basically from Egypt to the Persian Gulf, from what is today's Yemen in the Arabian Peninsula, all the way up to perhaps Baghdad in Iraq, as being the extent of the land of Ishmael.
Covering all of the modern country of Saudi Arabia.
That's right.
And Kuwait.
Kuwait.
Parts of Iraq, perhaps even almost all of Iraq. Maybe,
Yes.
I suppose in the northern part of Iraq, there are still other ethnic groups. I think
The Kurds.
the Iraqis are trying to get rid of them.
Yes.
Committing genocide against humanity. But we do have a specified location for the Sons of Ishmael. And one of the interesting things about all of this is that the Arabians today, the Arabs as they are generally known, are vehemently against Israel. Now, let's look at this Shur for just a moment. This little word Shur you mentioned here. That would be the Sinai Peninsula, where Israel spent 40 years in the wilderness, wouldn't it?
That's right, it would. As a matter of fact, the northern Sinai Peninsula in particular is called Shur in all the old maps. And so during the Exodus, Moses led the children of Israel through this land called Shur.
Now, in the New Testament, the Apostle Paul mentions that he went to, that he mentioned Sinai, which is in Arabia. And to me, there are some who think that Mount Sinai, the original real Mount Sinai, cannot possibly be the traditional site of Mount Sinai, where the Santa Katrina Monastery is located, down in the directly south of Israel, but would have to be across the Gulf of Aqaba over in Saudi Arabia. But not necessarily so, because if Shur, which is the territory directly south of Israel, is a part of Arabia, this original real estate, the abstract says it's okay.
That's right.
Sinai could be exactly where our tour groups go up,
There's one final element that I want to mention, too. Genesis 16:12, in which the Lord speaks to Hagar, Ishmael's mother, talks about this, and he will be a wild man. His hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him, and he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. That marks the Arab mentality, J.R.
Yes.
This wildness, this internecine strife, feudal, continual feuding is the Arab way.
I suppose if we were to be looking for the Arabs or the sons of Ishmael today, we have only to look at the warring tribes.
That's true.
And so this is one of the marks of the Arab world today. In fact, the Saudi Arabian flag has the sword of Islam on it. And that sword tells us volumes. We have this important statement that he will be a wild man. Gary, I think this is This is definitely the mark of the Arab mentality today and has been back through history.
One of their poets, his name is Al-Kutami, wrote this: "Our business is to make raids on the enemy, and on our neighbor, and on our brother, in case we find none to raid but a brother."
So it was a national sport, wasn't it?
National sport.
And has been down through the centuries. The law of blood revenge. How do you pronounce that Arabic
Well,
word?
I think it's ghazaf. If anyone out there speaks Arab, forgive me, please. Ghazaf. The law of blood revenge is the motivating idea among Arab tribes. In other words, if someone does to you, you must do back to them in kind.
Yes. Now the picture becomes complex when we return in just a moment. About halfway down the Red Sea, on the western shores of Saudi Arabia, about 45, 48 miles inland, lies the city of Mecca. Mecca is the center of Islam, and there in the heart of the city stands the Kaaba. It is believed by the Muslims to have been built by Ishmael and Abraham. And one of the stones, called the black stone, inside, I guess at the corner of this Kaaba, this huge building that stands in the middle of a square, is the central place of worship for the Muslims. They want to go there. They are commanded to go at least one time in their lives, every year if they can, to be at the Kaaba. It's the center of Islam. Tell us about that, Gary.
It's the center of Islam, but, you know, J.R., it was almost the trading crossroads before it ever became Mecca as we know it today. It was a trading crossroads in the great wealthy camel caravan routes that used to ply back and forth through the desert and down to the Gulf of Aqaba to ships.
And to the ships that went up the Red Sea.
Absolutely.
And out into the Indian Ocean and so on.
So there was a huge trade up through that area. And as a matter of fact, the thing that the events surrounding the birth of Islam in the 7th century had to do with tremendous corruption that had developed in Arabia. It was, shall we say, the world's leading shopping and trade point. And by the end of the 6th century, there was a wealthy trading class, and then there was a tremendously impoverished lower element in society, and there's almost a revolutionary attitude because life in Mecca was corrupt beyond belief.
Was Mecca also known for its gambling and prostitution?
Gambling, prostitution, black marketeering, anything you can think of. It was a wide open, wild city. And the Bedouins, who used to come back and forth through there, were known as people of high ethical standards, and they still were during that day. In other words, they had maintained their ethics, but the traders had lost theirs. And so there was this tremendous rift in society, and it was at this point that Muhammad was born in the 7th century, developed the religion of Islam.
Born in AD 570.
Yeah.
And give us his full name, Gary. This,
well,
this is a real stab.
There are a lot of son-ofs in here, but his name is Abdul Qasim Muhammad ibn Abdullah ibn Ab al-Muttalib ibn Hashim. And he was born, as you say, in AD 570, and he was his grandfather was the custodian, apparently, of the Kaaba, this religious site in Mecca, and claimed to be a descendant of Ishmael himself. And I wanted to stop and mention at this point that the Ishmaelites were not the only sons of the desert, because Abraham took Keturah to wife, and we find it in Genesis 25, the same place we find out about Ishmael's progeny, we find out about the sons of Keturah, and they are Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, Shua, Sheba, and Dedan. All of these are well known to be Arab tribal names. The sons of Dedan were Asherim, Letushim, Letumim. The sons of Midian, Ephah, Epher, Hanok, Abida, Elda'ah. These are all the offspring of Abraham through Keturah, and their names, if traced, and we don't have time to do it on today's program, turn out, for the most part, to be Arab place names in the Arabian Peninsula today. You can imagine the mix of all of these sons of the desert, the Bedouins who would come back and forth through the desert, fabled camel caravans. When they came to the city, they were shocked at the city life. And I think Muhammad gained such rapid prominence simply because he appealed to a populace that wanted to turn away from corruption at that time, and that's the way Islam was born.
Now, Muhammad himself was orphaned at age 6, and his grandfather raised him, I guess.
That's right, and he never learned to read or write. When he was a young man, he began to trek off into the desert. Supposedly, he had a series of visions there. He would come back and he would dictate to people who could read and write. They wrote it all down, and his collected visions became known as the Koran. And by the way, J.R., the Koran is an amazing document in that it really, really tells us what the Arabs think of themselves. For example, in section 2 of the Quran, verse 125, and when we made the house at Mecca a resort for mankind and a sanctuary, saying, take as your place of worship the place where Abraham stood to pray, and we imposed a duty upon Abraham and Ishmael, saying, purify my house for those who go around, that is, the pilgrims who come in, and those who meditate therein, and those who bow down and prostrate themselves. Well, in this verse of the Quran, it has Abraham and Ishmael as founders of the Kaaba at Mecca.
Now, this Kaaba is a large, rectangular-shaped building with a flat roof.
It's a cube, actually.
A cube.
Yeah.
Sitting right in the center of a large open area that is surrounded by, fancy buildings and outside parking lots and so on, and tens of thousands of Arabs come in there and bow to pray, and then they also go around, dance around in circles, I guess 7 times around this cube.
Right.
And there is in the corner of the cube a black stone set in a socket of silver. Tell us the supposed history of this black stone.
Well, supposedly, this stone fell from heaven, and it was an ancient stone that dates even before the time of Abraham. The Arab tribesmen were worshippers of stone, and they believed that certain spirits dwelt in these stones. These spirits were called jinn, which comes to us in English as genies. They believed that genies dwelt in these stones. This particular black stone is a meteorite which had fallen, and now it has been installed in the corner of the Kaaba as a venerated object of worship, and it's believed that Abraham and Ishmael laid the foundation of the new Kaaba, put the stone there, prayed to Allah to sanctify this place. And this is an article of belief for them that they come through Ishmael not only genetically but spiritually.
I think it's important to note that the Arabian tribes, the nomads, the Bedouin, were stone worshippers.
Absolutely.
Back in time immemorial, long before there was a Islamic religion.
That's right.
About age 40, Muhammad went out into the desert and began to put together his infrastructure for what has become one of the great religions of the world. What lies in the future ahead for
Well, J.R., there are, and I wish we had more time, but there are a number of prophecies. One of the best is the prophetic Psalm 83 that speaks about Edom, Ishmael, Keturah, the offspring of Abraham. And we have here in the 83rd Psalm, 1 through 8, keep not thou silence, O God, hold not thy peace, and be not still, O God, for lo, thine enemies make a tumult. And it goes on to explain how they want to wipe out Israel. And here they are. They have said, come, let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may no more be in remembrance. We're talking about here the tabernacles of Edom, the Ishmaelites, Moab, the Hagarenes, Gabal, Ammon, Amalek, the Philistines also with the inhabitants of Tyre. Asher also is joined with them. They have helped the children of Lot. And J.R., in this latter-day assemblage are all the people we've been talking about.
Including the Palestinians.
Including the Palestinians, by the way, who are traditionally sea peoples. It's interesting to me that the modern Palestinians, many of them have come across the Mediterranean, down through Lebanon, and into the present land.
So we have a mentality today to kill the Jews. This remains their goal. Yasser Arafat has not yet denounced the paragraphs in the Palestinian covenant that called for the destruction of Israel and the Jews. That's what we're looking at in the days ahead, so keep your eyes on the Middle East, and I think you will see Ishmael and the prophecies that God gave about him.